Hello, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Director's Cut, a podcast by the Directors Guild of America, featuring today's top directors sharing behind-the-scenes stories of their latest films and insights into the craft of directing. Please take a second to subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. This episode takes us behind the scenes of director Alison Klayman's new documentary, The Brink, about political consultant and former Trump administration chief strategist Steve Bannon. The film, a cinema verite chronicle of Bannon's global mission to spread extreme nationalism, tracks his moves through the 2018 American midterm elections and sheds light on his efforts to mobilize and unify far-right parties around the world. The Brink was screened as part of the DGA's documentary series, which aims to spotlight groundbreaking nonfiction films for DGA members and guests by presenting screenings of documentaries as well as conversations with their directors. In addition to The Brink, Ms. Klayman's filmography includes the documentary features Take Your Pills and 11/8/16, and episodes of the documentary series Enhanced and Opdocs. She was nominated for the DGA Award for Outstanding Directorial Achievement in Documentary for her 2012 film Ai Weiwei, Never Sorry. Following the documentary series screening of the film at the DGA Theater in New York, Ms. Klayman spoke with director Kristi Jacobson about filming The Brink. During their conversation, Ms. Klayman discusses her first meeting with Steve Bannon, the central idea that guided her through production and the edit, and why she declined the idea of a traditional sit-down interview.
Hi, I'm Kristi Jacobson, and this is Alison Klayman, the director of the extraordinary film you just saw. I'm going to moderate the Q&A tonight. So you've all just seen Allie's most recent work. You may have also seen her previous films that are multiple award-winning, and I'm just going to cut to the chase. Ai Weiwei, Never Sorry, The 100 Years Show, Take Your Pills, and as executive producer, Allie was part of the team that made Hooligan Sparrow and On Her Shoulders. So we are sitting with a woman who has accomplished a lot in a little amount of time thus far. I think it's, I don't know. I watched the film last night and woke up to some pretty shocking news this morning that many of you might also have read about, the mass murders in New Zealand, and just felt like these two things are not unlinked. I just feel really honored to be here tonight to talk about this film and how it came to be. So on that note, let's talk about how it came to be. You've made a film in which you had extraordinary access to a man who has very much, thought at least that he was controlling his image in the public and designing it. So can you tell me a little bit about the origin of the film and specifically what were your thoughts the first moment that you considered making a film about Steve Bannon?
Totally. Also, I wanted to thank Kristi and thank the DGA and thank all of you guys for being here. And I'm such a proud DGA member, so this is really cool because I've been in the seats here and I'm just really happy to be here. In the summer of 2017, Marie-Therese Girgis, who's my co-producer on this film, reached out to me and asked if I wanted to shoot a verite documentary about Steve Bannon. The backstory is that she knew him from kind of a previous life. In the end of his days in the film industry, he organized a group of investors and with their money bought a company called Wellspring, which is an art house distribution company. And he essentially kind of put Marie-Therese in charge, and he was her direct boss. So she worked closely with him. This was, again, the early 2000s. They worked closely, and she had a mixed relationship with him. She was appreciative of the opportunity. He also gave her really free rein to distribute all kinds of films that do not look like his films or what came to be his films. But he was also an unpleasant boss, and he was a Republican, but this was before the Tea Party days and before his path down, far-right extremism. And she lost touch with him until he joined the Trump campaign, and she basically had his information and reached out and sent him hate mail to say that she was very disappointed and she couldn't believe that he was part of this. And so, to her surprise, he would write back, and he was very polite. And so it was around the summer of 2017, she just thought, there's only so far that personal catharsis can, go, and maybe there's something I can do, and I produce documentary films. And so she asked him about doing a film, and he said no several times. She says that he said, you'll destroy me, because he knew where she was coming from. And then, the fourth time he said, I'll do it. And she didn't think of anyone else but me, which is cool, for the film. So in a way, I think there's something cosmic, because I understood immediately when she asked me about it. To me, this felt like it was in my wheelhouse in terms of I understood what, we didn't really we didn't strategize much, except it was like, I just understood the power of verite filmmaking, what it means to try to get access and watch someone over a long period of time and let them reveal themselves.
Having done that with Ai Weiwei, Never Sorry, quite successfully.
and and of course the big thing that's different here is that it was kind of I didn't know Bannon personally, so I said yes, kind of without question, and I said, except I have to meet him because I don't know what he's like at all. He was still in the White House at this time. He probably saw the writing on the wall, and he soon was leaving the White House. And when I first met with him, I just, except for what I thought of his policies, and I knew this impression of him in the public sphere, I didn't even know what he would sound like or, how he would move. And it was the first 30 seconds with him, I was just like, oh man, this is a good character and he's gonna say some shit, it was just very clear in that sense. I think the problem was that this is what we say now, and again, we didn't really talk about it at the time, but there was something about his image in the popular imagination, which was my imagination because I didn't have any personal knowledge of him. He was like an evil genius and the mastermind behind, Trump. He was he was on the cover of Time magazine as the great manipulator. But there's something very powerful about that image. And clearly he reveled in it, he wasn't trying to dispel that myth or something, And the reality of the human, would I was sure would certainly be different, but I didn't know what it would be. Maybe, and I wanted to see. And I think for me, there was never a question of, is his worldview one that is on the side of righteousness, but the question of who he was one for me. And more importantly, who cares what's in his heart? What is he doing? Who is he working with? What can you expose by being in the room with him? What can you expose by following him, seeing who is paying for what he's doing? Or, comparing the public versus what he says, his rhetoric versus what he does. So that was kind of what I was excited about in terms of the opportunity.
And can you talk a little bit about just, I think I just need to point out that I took notes while I was watching the film last night, and on 2 different occasions, at one time I wrote, I can't get enough. I don't want this to end. And that's not ever how I would have thought I would have felt when watching a film that's exclusively about Steve Bannon and his orbit. And also, this feels like a fiction film, and I think that documentaries are films and fiction films are films. I don't think that one is greater than the other or better than the other. But there was it was after the Roy Moore defeat, and there were just like some shots and just the way it was unfolding that felt almost scripted. I know that it wasn't. I'm not suggesting that it was. So I just wanted to talk about, and then I remembered, and many of us work in film here or in some capacity, that you were alone with the camera in that situation and yet captured all of this in a way that lent itself to be edited really beautifully and artfully crafted ultimately, obviously with score and all the rest, which I love. But so I just wanted you to talk about just like the 100% observational approach that you took, and also that many will often say, well, that's the fly on the wall, and it's not a fly on the wall, right? It's a filmmaker, a really smart filmmaker, who's capturing this.
I know. I feel the last couple weeks as we're gearing up for the release, I'm really feeling like I'm being called a fly a lot, which I guess that's the style. But you're right. I mean, it's not just fly on the wall. I think that I think in a way also emotionally, the fact that I was a one-person crew. While it presented difficulties, I also think it kind of helped me get through who I was filming and what I was filming, because it was like something to focus on. I directed a segment of this film called 11/8/16 that was like a bunch of different directors all following one person during the 2016 election. And I was filming Dave Davies, who's a reporter in Philadelphia. And so I experienced the election of Donald Trump kind of through the screen of my camera, and that's like this mediated experience, as it is when you're, if anybody has that kind of experience, and it's in a way, it's like, I fell apart when I came home, because that's personally, I don't know if I was surprised, but I was upset, and but the experience, you're kind of, because you're just thinking about the light and the framing and the sound, and because running it all, and I do think that was kind of helpful and meditative in some ways, while I frankly would describe filming with Bannon day in, day out, because he also is kind of on a loop, and I could finish his sentences on his sort of stump speech and what he'd say to reporters. But because of where I personally come from with my politics, I felt like it was like having poison poured into my ear all the time. But I was also engaged in other ways, which was I was trying to decide where to put the camera and what to film, and thinking about how would this fit in a storyline, and you kind of just treat every day like it's definitely going to be in the film, and you're just always trying to figure out how is this going to be in the film, even though there's hundreds of hours and it's a 90-minute kind of film. But when I guess in terms of other parts of the question, it's not just fly on the wall. I think in the film you hear my voice more as it goes on. That is both representative of a relationship that evolved. I didn't say as much to him in the beginning. I was kind of getting my bearings. I didn't know him very well. He wasn't used to having me around. It also, I filmed for a long time before we had the release officially signed, so I also felt like I didn't really want to say a lot before I knew that we had the release signed. But, also the point of the movie was not, can I get a point on Bannon, or can I get, not even a gotcha, but it's not about my the off-screen voice interaction with him. Anything that could be done by someone with him in front of my lens was better than me having to say it from off-screen. But we had hours and hours long conversations by the end, and I did have a lot of options of times where I thought I could show the kinds of things that I show, I think, when you do hear my voice, but I think it's very calibrated how you feel.
Can you talk
it.
specifically about the choice? I mean, I think I know why you chose to put the scene, the interaction about the pronunciation of the Chinese names, but can you? I don't know. I mean, what were you experiencing in that moment, And then and then also the decision to use that, and what again, because and I don't mean to insult the fly on the wall description, because it could be a fly on the wall. It's just a very smart fly, is all I want to say. Yeah. And creative. But so also filmmaking involves making lots of decisions, not just when you're in the field, which is to put yourself in the right position at the right time, and it's also about the decisions that you make in the edit, which in this case was a very fast edit. And so the decision to include that, and tell me a little bit about that process.
Yeah, so what's funny is I think I was pretty spot on in the field about when I shot scenes that I was like, that feeling where you're like, oh, that's going in the movie. I'm usually, in general, pretty right about that, and I think a lot of what I thought was my best material is what's in the film. I was usually kind of wrong about what I thought was my best interactions with him. Probably because that isn't the kind of, you often hear my voice in films, but it's usually by utility. And I think I'm a character through my authorship. I think you can feel that, I know I can feel this is a movie that I made that no one else would have made, but it's not that I am a persona. And so I'm not really performing in that way when I'm interacting with him. I'm usually trying to see how I can get him to say more stuff and come at him or say things in different ways, and I'm not thinking about how I come off. So then it's like you see it in the edit, or your editors see it through their eyes, and you start to realize, oh, I thought that was so great, and you're actually like, oh, it's terrible. That's not a good moment. And so the Wang Qishan pronunciation, that was the kind of, we would have that conversation. That wasn't me being like, this is going to be a funny scene, but when I had it, and again, that's the kind of thing I couldn't believe, he's really going to argue with me about this? Dude, you don't, the audacity or the cheekiness or, the hubris that it was just, there was so much wrapped in that, the idea that he's relying on, also, I don't know for a fact, but I've been told by journalists that John Thornton doesn't speak Mandarin, even though he works a lot with China. But Bannon knows I speak Mandarin. He knows he doesn't, and he's terrible at languages, and that he's going to keep arguing and also show complete disdain for the idea of how Chinese people pronounce a Chinese name as well. And so there was so much in there, and also I think it shows how he underestimates me, or how he likes to pretend that he is, or again, who knows what he really thinks, but that's how he chose to act repeatedly in that interaction. But I actually just cut that for fun for myself, and it was over Thanksgiving. I had some friends who were other Americans who had lived in Beijing at the same time as me, and we had a Friendsgiving dinner, and I was just playing it for them because I thought it was funny, and everybody loved it, and I had this moment where I was like, you don't want to look back and think one of your favorite things, even though I was playing it to a crowd that would clearly think that was funny. I was like, I had the idea as I was building the section about Miles Kwok, and I knew that China is something that's big on Bannon's agenda, but I was like, wait, maybe this is another way to expose in a non-wonky way the thinness of his expertise and knowledge in this area. And so I kind of tried it out, and then it ended up working. And I do feel sometimes in the edit, it was a very fast edit, and I worked along with two editors, and we kind of always were working on different parts of the film, and most things in the film were probably touched at some point by all of us. Maybe someone took the lead, but it would get passed off, just to keep it fresh and to keep things moving, and sometimes I could add something because it was I knew the footage or I knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't build as spectacular of the bones of a great montage, or an editor who found a moment that I hadn't thought about, and she saw it and I was like, wow, that's like the Edgware Road conversation, which was a select that one of my editors had pulled out early, and I didn't necessarily remember that moment, and that's one of my favorite scenes in the film. So it was super collaborative, and we just kind of didn't have any time to waste. And so everything in the film really had to earn its place and fit in a whole storyline and kind of go through lots of people's eyes.
And for a documentary that was shot over 13 months to be edited, well, you shot the final frame on election day 2018, November 6, 7, 8, something like that. And the film premiered on like January something at Sundance, and we're sitting here in like 2 weeks before its theatrical release. That is tight.
Yeah, I wouldn't advise it, and I don't want any, financiers or distributors or anyone to get ideas that's like, oh yeah, you just do that. And that's part of why there's 2 editors plus me. That's part of why there's 2 composers. Everything I feel really great about. I don't think the film would have been any different. I think that we would have had less overages in finishing, and I think we all would have felt better, like emotionally, and like right. But I always knew that the edit, that we were trying to finish it in a timely manner, because there was some urgency, but never to compromise the quality of the film, if that makes, I mean, obviously you can always say that, but that was true. I feel like if I was like, this movie's garbage, we can't put it out, there wouldn't have been an issue. But I also think we worked really smart, and part of that is because of how much responsibility we all felt, and for me, how much intention. Like, I came to the edit, not even that I was like better prepared than in the past, but like everything was just super thought out, because I think every day I was like, you're making this movie. Why are you making this movie? Like, are you doing what you set out to do? People are going to come at you from all sides. I think I would go to bed at night just imagining, like now I did, like, today was a press day, and it's like I probably was imagining the kinds of things I'd have to talk about on days like this, like every night, because it really felt like a scary, like if you do this wrong, for me it's like if you do this wrong, like the right loves you and the left hates you, or the left hates you and the right hates you, or there's like so many combinations of and reasons that people won't give the movie a shot is really what it is, just because of who the subject is. But I believed that what I was doing had value, but I had to prove it to myself every day. And it meant that I was like, there has to be a reason why every choice is made. It can't just be, look how cool this access is. Like, I got to film Bannon. That was the number one thing. This movie's not about being enamored of the access. Like, I have something to say that is completely about what I observed, not like I came in with a worldview, but I didn't come in with an idea of what the story is, and then I, made up things to show that story. The story revealed itself.
That's the story of most not great films.
Yeah, and I felt like also it should work out that way. I was pretty confident that as long as I had the access, as long as I was able to film real things, and he was, as long as I had enough material, there was a story there that would do what I had to do. I didn't have to do anything misleading or any tricks. And back to one of your earlier questions, like the verite approach. This is the first time I've ever done a film where there's no talking head, like interviews or other interviews to contextualize. Like with Ai Weiwei, it was verite, and I did follow him, but I had a lot of other voices to talk about, his backstory and the art world and China, all that kind of stuff. I was like, what a minefield. How would you pick who's going to weigh in on this? I felt like it had to be, an unmediated experience between the audience and the subject, except the mediator was me, like through all of the choices I made, but I wasn't gonna, how do you pick who's gonna frame things? And then, we thought maybe kind of like at the very, very beginning, kind of like with Wiener as a model, there was like that one key sit-down interview that it seemed like was done at the end, And so we sort of like, if you look at, the earliest budget, there was like a budget for like having something like that. And then it was like, we were talking all the time. And I was like, ugh. And I also saw how there was no value in encountering Bannon in an interview context. Like, I felt like he does not sit down in good faith. He thrives in the combat of it all. I just felt like that wasn't a place where there was anything revealing. And as the year went on, he did, every long format interview under the sun, Charlie Rose and Fareed Zakaria. He just did so many things too, where I was like, well, that's not, people can find that elsewhere.
And when you're spending time with someone in their real life, things will happen. When you interview them in a setting in which you've seen them be interviewed in, no matter how brilliant or not you are, it seems like a rigged game. I want to open it up to the audience. If there are questions, I have like a million more I could ask, but I see a hand here and then a enthusiastic hand there. So the question is about access and whether at times you were denied or more often you had open access, and also about releases. I think most people could hear, so you can grade me on my summaries later.
It's a really good question because, it's about the access to Bannon, but then to me, the movie would only be interesting if he's talking to other people, and that is a daily negotiation. A lot of times he was my greatest champion in telling people, oh, you should be in the movie. I was always, I was never misleading about who I was, although I think a lot of people, when they encountered me, were probably like, do you work for him? And that, like, there's a lot of journalists that he works with, so they were always like, who the fuck is this? And when it comes to people who are on, who are, far-right heads of state or whatever. Basically, if anyone ever asked me, my line was always, I'm an independent filmmaker. I don't work for him. When he would introduce me, he would say, she's a documentary filmmaker. She's doing a movie about populism and nationalism and the whole thing. He never said, she's making a movie about me, because I think he thought that would sound like, he was too full of himself. And it was kind of true. My intention was to make a movie that's about things that are bigger. What was great is that he would often encourage people to be in the movie, except people that he didn't want me to film. Like one example is Michael Wolff was around a lot. And this is after Fire and Fury, so, I assume he's working on something new. And every time I would see him come, I would not be invited to join. And I would, text Bannon directly and be like, it'd be really great for the movie if, we got a scene like this, or, it'd be really, and, he would just not respond. Like, he made it clear when there were things that he didn't want me to film. And I would say there's like different categories. There's things that he asked me to film with alacrity, which made it pretty clear that it was something that he thought would be good in the movie. If it, I wouldn't go out of my way to do it, but to me, it's like, you don't have to use anything. So, it's like I would film stuff that if I felt like it was performative for me, like, I just don't use it. There was stuff, like you said, where there's meetings where maybe there's like a sort of preamble that's, neutered, and then I'm sort of asked to leave, and then they have the real conversation. There's somewhere like and I would say like the Miles Kwok interaction was like that. And I filmed them together a few times, and every time it was like that. I chose to put that in the film because I think that's kind of clear. And I think that it also shows that I think it says a lot about, brings up questions about what kind of relationship this is. And that was, that's why I put it in, not because I think that was like, an intimate meeting. I think it was kind of a very stilted, strange one. And then it's an entry point to talk about other things. When he meets with the French politicians from the National Rally Party, I think from my perspective, that was a real meeting. And then once they started to talk about financials, they asked me to leave, and actually then was able to come back. Then there's some things like the dinner with all the different European leaders, which I feel like was an accomplishment to know about and get to film, and I filmed that from start to finish. And a lot of them were meeting each other for the first time too, and I felt like I didn't feel like my presence changed. Again, this is all my estimation, but I feel like this is what I do for a living: is watch things and film things and decide if I think it's bullshit or not. So, So I think there was like always a range. And then I would try to get people to sign releases. It really was just me in the field. And so sometimes I would try to get people to say it on camera or sign releases, or, you know, especially in the US, like implied consent is, you know, our friend. And, you know, I was never secretly filming. It was very, very clear that I was there. So, you know, you kind of do your best. And if anything, public figures, it's kind of more in your favor. Also, whenever we were in public spaces, that's in your favor. When you're in private spaces, it was like I had a signed release from Bannon, and I had his permission. But it was tough, and like, you know, I feel like I get really territorial sometimes too, and I had a hard time often with, you know, journalists who I'm like, you know, wanted to be like, don't worry, but you know, when I say don't worry, it's like, don't worry, I'm not part of like Bannon tricking you or something like that. But on the other hand, everyone that came into the frame is like, you know, part of the story. And I think Bannon's relationship with the media was something that was important to me to show. And, you know, it's not about like just good guys and bad guys, but it's like, how do you cover of a movement that is interested in legitimizing itself and reaching more people through mainstream media is a big question. I think it's a question that should be on the film as well, and that's why I chose to make that part of the film, and I was trying to include as many journalists. And he spends a lot of his day is spent texting with reporters and giving interviews, and he's feeding stories as much as he is, you know, or sending and getting information from them as much as he is like being a source of, and you know, that was something that was hard to do. He often didn't let me film interactions with certain press as well. You know, and I think it was about, he goes on the record and off the record a lot. And that's a big tool of his. And I would try to talk to reporters outside of being with him to get a sense of what they thought of him too. So yeah.
But the film is a testament in like relation to that question of it's not about what you didn't get, it's about what you did get and what you did to get what you got, in terms of not getting stuff. Yeah, it seems like it was a mixture of both.
The one answer to both of those questions can be, does it matter? But yes, he saw the film. My producer showed it to him, like an almost finished version, before Sundance, and from what I understand, yeah, I mean, my last interaction with him was when I took the microphone off of him the night of the midterms, and then she kind of picked up the burden of subject relationship and management, which was really great for me. So she showed him the film, and as she says, you know, I think he was playing it a little bit close to the vest, and you know, I think it was a lot to see. I think I've had that experience with other subjects. You know, it's a lot to see a long-term verite film, you know, completed, and I think there were things he was happier about and less happy about, but ultimately, you know, that it was a fair portrayal. Yeah, I think so too. And then, but that communication with him continued apace until the reviews started to come out, and at that point, he cut off all communication with her. My interpretation of that is that fortunately, there was a consensus in a lot of what's been written so far, knock on wood, that, you know, with a lot of things like he hung himself, you know, there's not a lot of ideas there. You know, it's a critique of him that I don't think he's used to. It's not, he's evil, he's a racist. He's kind of a joker. And what I also believe that he, you know, may try to put out, you know, I think the best thing he could do is to pretend he doesn't care or to say he likes it. But I think that this initial reaction kind of, knowing him now, I mean, I think it says a lot. And that's why I say ultimately, though, and it took me a long time to come to this, because when you make documentaries, what your subjects think of it means a lot. And I'm very proud that I have a track record of subjects who feel like they were treated fairly. This was one, though, where if he really liked the movie, I would feel really mixed, because he likes to boast that he is going to use things. But I feel like, I am very confident I am not his tool, and this is my movie. And so to that extent, I really had to come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter what he thinks. And I don't mean it doesn't matter if he's upset. I mean it doesn't matter if he later says whatever he's going to say. I think for me, this is my movie, and I know what it's communicating. It's in the eye of the beholder, but to a lot of audiences already, I feel like I have been understood and heard, and I also think it's very fair. So I'm a little bit like, who cares what he thinks? And does he have a conscience? That is really like, I don't know what's in his heart. He doesn't act like he does, though. So the question was about our first meeting and what we discussed and if there were any ground rules imposed. So the first meeting was with my producer, who, again, they had a pre-existing relationship. And he walked in. We waited for hours. This is now, I know, like totally typical of even when I was filming. But yeah, and I didn't have a camera. You're right. And he walked in and immediately just talking. And he had just wrapped, I think the day before, like 2 days of interviews with Charlie Rose for 60 Minutes. That was really his first TV interview. And my impression, I remember, because he was telling us about it, I was like, wow, I think he kept saying, oh, I prepped for days, and then da-da-da. And I was like, I think he's just like still running off the fumes of like, he was like prepping, and he just like wants to say everything that he like didn't get to say in the interview, because he just talked nonstop. He's constantly changing the topic. I mean, in that sense, I was a little bit, I immediately, for my part, I kind of clocked him as a formidable opponent, in the sense that I was like, man, he's just gonna, I couldn't, fact check in the moment all these things he was saying, and I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna wait a while before like we engage in this manner. But I found him to be, again, like a good character, because in the sense of like, is there a movie to be made here? That's kind of what was on my mind. I tried to say, my game plan was to say as little as possible and to reveal as little as possible about myself, not in a deceptive way, but just in a like, you're being deposed, and it's like, make them get stuff out of you, but like don't offer any information. But my producer was very upfront with him, and said things that, she would tell him, what you're doing is terrible, and you're going to hell, and this is crazy. And I was kind of shocked, and it was also kind of relieving, because that kind of set the tone. It's like, I'm not here undercover. And she introduced me and said, she's a great film, blah, blah. She like said good things about me, and she was like, and she's, she's Jewish, her grandparents are Holocaust survivors. She's like, totally, like it was on the table who we were, but we're going to make a fair movie. That was what was always promised. We're going to make the movie's not cheap shots. It's going to be fair, but it's like probably going to be critical. And what we were banking on is, and she did even say this to him a few times, it might be critical in ways you're not used to or you might not expect. That really was on. I don't know if we said all of those things in the first meeting, but that was 100% down to the end, things that were being communicated. But I just remember being horrified when she would say things like this. I don't remember the specifics, but she would be arguing about something, maybe about the Muslim ban. She's Arab American. She's not Muslim, but she feels an allegiance in that sense. I mean, as I think we all do, as whether you're Muslim or not, you can be upset about the travel ban. But she was saying something, and she was like, "Right, Alison," and I was so mad at her. I was like, "Why? Don't drag me in," because there was a trust there, but I was. It's not that he would say, I won't work with you, but it's like, I have a style, and, my game plan and through the whole time was like, to be myself, but to not overshare wherever possible. So that was kind of how that meeting went, and he was very also impressed. Another thing was saying, never sorry, and, China's very important to him, and, she speaks Mandarin, and, it was just kind of trying to make him interested. But I would say, like, it wasn't like after that first meeting, it did take months to like negotiate the formal release. But a few weeks later, I started filming, and it was sort of under like a provisional agreement, which was like release to be negotiated, but we know you're filming a movie kind of a thing. Yeah. I genuinely went in without, an opinion of him to change because I didn't know him. I really only knew him from Twitter or the cover of Time magazine, which I don't really think of as knowing a person. I don't think that my political view of the world changed during this time, just like his didn't change by meeting me and talking to me. I mean, to be perfectly honest. But I would say my opinion of him changed because it was like going from, a blank slate to having an opinion. And for me, I think portraying someone as a, and I have used the term, someone more 360 degrees, showing someone as having a full personality. It was important to not be afraid of that. And I actually thought if I was trying to not show him in lighthearted moments, in moments that some people find likable, charming, seeing other people being charmed by him, that you had to not be afraid of showing that, even if you disagree with what he does or says or who he works with, because I think then you're susceptible to the two things. You're susceptible to the criticism that you're keeping things out, and of course it's a 90-minute film, and it's a distillation of my experience of him over 13 months and many days of shooting and hundreds of hours of footage. But it was important to be okay with showing someone that it's not just a hit list, like a greatest hits of things you disagree with or things that you agree with. I mean, either one of those would be a limited film. But also because, to me, people who, and again, I'm a filmmaker with opinions and a political view. I mean, people who perpetuate, who do bad things, people who don't mind perpetuating hate speech, people who don't mind policies that are discriminatory and racist and Islamophobic, and they aren't necessarily spitting fire 24 hours a day. And I think that if that's and for me, it's like if that's what you think is what a bad person is, you might be missing some bad people around you if that's what you think they're going to look like. And in that way, my mission was not to redeem Bannon or redeem a vision of, it was really to figure out who he was. And when I saw that there were going to be things that people can laugh with him, it's not about laughing at him. I think he has a good self-deprecating sense of humor. He's a fascinating mix of having self-awareness and also not having self-awareness, and that was continually surprising to me as that would reveal itself. But I just think that is the more powerful warning as well as the more accurate portrayal of this person. And I think that's part of that's one of the tools in his kit is like, and a lot of journalists talk about, they really, that they like him or they, that is something that's important to recognize. You don't have to like take away any good thing that you see in a person in order to have a portrayal where you are still critical of their actions.
I think we have time for one more question if there is one. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Allie. Yay! And the film is coming out in theaters on March 29.
Yeah,
March 29th at IFC Center. Is there a hashtag or
the Brink film is its handle, but yeah, March 29th, okay. IFC Center, also in LA and DC, and then it rolls out.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. If you'd like to hear more from the DGA's documentary series screenings, check out episode 167, which features director Alison Chernick discussing her documentary Itzhak with director Robert Whitey. You can find past episodes of The Director's Cut wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, if you're enjoying our podcast, please take a moment to rate and review us on iTunes. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow cinephiles find the show. Thanks again for listening, and have a great week. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.